Guys, welcome to Tubs at the Club. And yes, we're calling Tubs at the Club, even though it's the Big Sky Podcast Network Power Rankings, because show's presented by Tubs at the Club, which means it's brought to us by Snake River Stampede Canadian Whiskey. I'm your host, Brian, co-host Patty Frakes, holding it down in Cheney. Which, hey, we've got another sad week. It's always hard to be in Cheney. I have heard it's always hard to be in Cheney, but like these last 2 weeks, it's really hard to be in Cheney. So, look, hey, you guys know the way this works. Big Sky Podcast Network Power Rankings. This is just the average of votes from Big Sky media figures, guys like Coulter Nuanez, Andrew Houghton, other people who we're in contact with, votes from Big Sky Podcast Network contributors, guys like me, guys like, hey, Patty votes because, hey, you contribute to one of the shows. People from Tubbs, people from Grisfin, people from R&R, Weber State Weekly, all the people we know who pay attention to not just their own team, but the Big Sky Conference as a whole. We vote, we average them out, and that's our show. We do not spend time going over poll jockeying because I don't give a shit, and we're recording at 10 p.m. on a Sunday when I'm waking up pretty damn early. So if we're going to talk about it, I got to care about it, and I don't care about poll jockeying. But we do care about how things went in the conference. And this week, look, we're 25% through the football season. It's just, Patty, it floors me week in, week out, how quickly football season is just so all-encompassing, but it's in a blink, it's gone. We're a quarter through, and what I want to talk about with each team, other than a little bit of the week that was, is some teams know exactly who they are, Patty. And like, hey, you can tell. You watch, there's certain teams that we'll reference later on. You watch them, you can tell that team knows exactly what they're trying to do on Saturday, and they're doing it. Some teams are closing in, not like they might know a good amount of who they are, but they're still figuring a couple things out. And some teams are quite lost. So we're mostly concerned with who knows who they are, but that's what we're paying attention to in addition to talking about what happened throughout the week is how'd they do, and does it look like this team knows who they are? Patty, I want you to pull yourself off the shelf for a second because we have two teams we're going to fly through because they don't know who they are. Patty, just tell everyone how you're recovering without talking about the Eastern game. Like we see the pain. I could have led with the Go Vandals for you, but I didn't because we're going to do that 1,000 times on the other show. But how are you recovering from 2 rough weeks? I'm asking about Patty, not Eastern right now.
You know, I'm doing all right. It's been a pretty brutal, like you get your hopes up preseason pretty good. Then week 1 happens and you're feeling really good. And then holy crap, it's just been a slam. And then after the Drake weekend, it was just a little cheap shot at the end, like when everything's over already. So it definitely hurts. Like the whole how we were feeling about the season just completely flipped on its head in 8 days. And now we're looking at, coaching decisions rather than, hey, can Eastern make the playoffs? So it's been a kind of a brutal swing in 8 days.
Well, hey, that's the before and after of football season. There's 2 of them to me for Big Sky teams. There's one, hey, everyone starts off, especially transfer portal era, with a blank slate. And if you want to say, hey, not every team technically has that, like, hey, I'm with you. But I've been a fan of bad teams. That's how out of conference play starts, is like, hey, you suspend your disbelief and you get excited because why else would you do it? Now, if you're like Patty and it's a rough few weeks, you do have a little bit of light, which is the start of Big Sky Conference season. You get to say, okay, hey, like whatever, like out of conference, it helps. But if we kick ass in conference, it changes things. It's pretty hard to kick ass in conference when you don't do well in out of conference. But those are kind of the 2 times when you get to say, hey, like the season's reset. Is when it's truly reset, and then conference play. We're 1 week away from conference play. So the first teams we're going to talk about, number 12, Cal Poly. We're going to talk about Cal Poly for 1 second. Cal Poly picked up probably their only win of the season over Division II Western Oregon, 31-14. I'm not going to talk about the box score other than to say Western Oregon is now 0-3 in Big Sky play, and they've gotten their ass kicked 2 of the 3 games. We're kind of competitive against Cal Poly. Cal Poly is 12 because I think they know who they are, which is they're going to be last place in the conference. Moving on from Cal Poly. Number 11, top 5 Portland State. top 5 Portland State. I'm a little shocked they dropped because Portland State, this is going to be one of the few weeks Portland State will not conclude Saturday with a loss. Now, the Vikings didn't pick up a win. Their game against South Dakota, which would most assuredly, Patty, have been a loss, was canceled due to an outbreak of whooping cough on the Portland State team. So honestly, the bigger takeaway from this is if we were a Missouri Valley football show, we'd be talking about how South Dakota just got robbed of an extra win. And that's where the theoretical intrigue in this game is. I think Portland State kind of knows who they are in the same way Cal Poly does. Like they can't really pass the ball. They have a murderous schedule. It's a really long, rough season. So maybe an extra bye week is is best case scenario for Portland State from where we're at. The first team we're going to talk a little bit about, Northern Colorado, Patty. And I think you and I are similar in our understanding of Northern Colorado, which is to say they do know the Bears know a little bit of who they are. Northern Colorado played top 25 Abilene Christian close and honestly had every chance to win this game. Ended up losing 24-22 on a 54-yard field goal at the end. So Northern Colorado, and it was just the saddest thing in the world. ESPN headline for this is Northern Colorado getting denied their first win since 2022, which is true. The Bears did not win a game last year. They have not yet won a game this year, but just the math of 2 years felt so it rang as much worse than it actually is. But in Patty, I'll go to you first. You and I both think Northern Colorado, that for a bad team in the conference, they know a little bit more about who they are. I don't think there's no wins on the Colorado schedule for this season, but hey, you've been on the shelf. Tell me what you saw from Northern Colorado's 24-22 loss to Abilene Christian.
Yeah, I think they have a little bit of promise, and like the last 2 years, it hasn't really felt like that. Most of the year, they just did not look good at all. This team, their defense is, I'm not going to say legit, but they have a good defense, especially when you're in the context of like, hey, this was picked to be the worst team in the Big Sky or the second worst team in the Big Sky. I mean, they held Maverick McIver, who is Abilene Christian's starting quarterback. He's led the FCS in passing yards through 2 weeks, and they held him to 229 yards, 6.5 yards per attempt. Like that's pretty damn good for a guy that was throwing 350 yards a game through 2 weeks. They look like they're going to be able to stop some teams and be in some games that they probably shouldn't. But like you said, offensively, they're just not looking great. They rushed for 240 yards, but that was on 65 carries, so like 3.5 yards a carry. And they had a whopping 25 yards through the air in this game. So I'm sure Kevin Marshall will appreciate this kind of football. But, there's a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, as in like, hey, they got a defense.
Yeah, so what I think we know about Northern Colorado, what Northern Colorado knows about themselves, is their route to win. They need games to be lower scoring, and they're going to have to accrue their offense. One, they're going to need to force turnovers, and they're going to have to get it done on the ground. The pass game in Northern Colorado is about as strong as the run game in Cal Poly. As you referenced, Jonah Chong and Hank Gibbs combined to go 6 of 13 for 25 yards, 13 pass attempts for a total of 25 yards. Or hey, let's honestly, I think it looks worse if you look at completions. 6 completions across the entire game for 25 yards and a pick. So technically 7 completions. So Northern Colorado is not going to score very well, but they like you said, they play tough defensively. There are teams you can understand how Northern Colorado could be a team that's going to sneak up on someone who theoretically is better than them, or could easily, depending on their schedule, handle some of the lower teams in the conference. But offense is just going to be a struggle session the entire year. They're going to become increasingly predictable, I think, for the other team to game plan against. And Northern Colorado has proven they're not going to beat you through the air. And there's no reason to believe that's going to change. Number 9, before we get to number 9, though, we got to talk about show sponsor Snake River Stampede Canadian Whiskey. You got 2 options, Snake River. Doesn't matter which one you go with, whether it's the entry-level Stampede or you want to class up with a big win like Abilene Christian just had over Northern Colorado. You pour out your small batch 1915 edition. Both options priced great at Idaho State liquor stores. $25.95 for the Stampede, $36.95 this month for the 1915 small batch. Both are 3-grain whiskeys, corn, malted barley, and rye. Both have double barrel finishes. You can't go wrong either way. Grab yourself Snake River. Number 9, Eastern Washington. And Patty, we do need to talk about the Eagles for a minute, because look, in the same way, like we just said, Northern Colorado, hey, like for a bad team, they kind of know a little bit about themselves. Man, Eastern, on this show, we talked up Eastern after the Monmouth win. Last week on this show, your takeaway was, hey, Eastern kind of shot, like terrible loss. But Eastern shot themselves in the foot. Well, they responded to that adversity with a loss at Southeast Louisiana, 28-24. For hit box score stuff for like just 2 seconds, and then I want to turn it over to you, Patty. But Eastern, look, they didn't murder themselves with penalties. 10 total more yards penalized than Southeastern Louisiana. Did not murder themselves with turnovers. Neither team committed a turnover this game. The yardage is pretty dang close between both teams, but not a shock in a 24-28 game. So, Patty, I need you to talk me through this. What's happening with Eastern? They honestly looked like they could have been 4-0 in out of conference play, because they have a weak Nevada next week. Yeah. But we're looking now at, wow, like you'd probably bet 1-3 at this point, and that's a complete 180 from how it felt after week 1.
Yeah, 100%. So the big bright spot, even though, I mean, through 2 weeks, the bright spot was, or through week 1, it was like the offense looked good. The defense had some weird breakdowns, but they held them to 40 yards rushing. You talk about the Drake game, and even if they threw some pop passes in there. With those included, it was like 80 yards rushing. And so we're like, maybe the Eastern rushing defense is fixed. Maybe this team has a chance to be pretty good if they tweak a couple things in the secondary. Guess what? They gave up 281 yards on the ground this week, 149 of those by their kind of bell cow, big running back, same kind of player that has killed Eastern for years.
Antonio Martin Jr. is the guy you're talking about.
Yeah. It was very much a, okay, we haven't changed at all. I think this defense has the talent on it. It's just things were just horrible, man. It was a pretty brutal one to watch, and you just kind of watching it, you're just like, geez, this is just the same team as last year. That's how it felt watching it anyways. Another thing to note, I believe Eastern went for it on 4th down like 2 or 3 times and didn't get it. And it just, it set up Southeastern with good field position.
The answer is twice.
Yeah, it just like
3 of 12 on 3rd down, 0 of 2 on 4th down equates to 3 of 14 on those those key plays.
The money downs, and it was this game. It was like what little air was left in the balloon after Drake. You're sitting there like, hey, Montana had a shitty one at the beginning of the year. They still made playoffs, went on this big run. Maybe Eastern could run the table, make the playoffs. All that air is gone, popped. I am fully like, okay, this is not a good Eastern team. The defense did not look good at all. Eastern does have like a lot of injuries to like pretty key players on the defense, but I'm not willing to say, 280 yards on the ground is because of 2 or 3 injuries on defense. So, pretty disappointing. Felt like the E's got a little bit outcoached, and I think that's at what we're kind of at this point of the Aaron Best tenure is like we're kind of looking. Maybe I think this might be it for Coach Best.
Well, and hey, for Eastern, here's what to me is a little. If I'm you, is what I'm upset with. Other than every point you just made. Eastern does know who they are. They're not a Northern Colorado team. They're a team that is fine with a few extra points being on. And even if the Eastern's defense, Yeah, even if they're improved, let's say on the ground compared to last season, they were worse than Cal Poly on the ground last season, which is a very long way, Patty, of enunciating. Eastern knows like they probably need to score around over 30-ish to win. They have to convert offensively and they have to show enough on the defensive side. Eastern scored 3 points in the second half. With the team, with who this team is, with who the talent this team has, if they score 3 points, but they're losing, at Idaho or something like that, like, okay, you say, well, I get it. But 3 points at Southeastern Louisiana, no, like that's just never not going to get it done with this team. So we got to move on. Next team we're going to look at is, so we're talking about, we just finished number 9 Eastern. I think we need to talk about number 8 Idaho State for a minute. Hey, we had some firsthand research in the comment section from McLean Westbrook, the godfather, aka host of Jungle Land podcast covering Idaho State football, a new Big Sky Podcast Network show. So Idaho State loses to North Dakota. North Dakota is now 2-0 in Big Sky play after beating Montana in week 2. But 52-28 was not the loss. Idaho State. Nice Freudian slip there. 52-28, not the loss that Idaho State needed, and not the loss. The loss came in a way like I just don't think anyone saw coming after how Kobe Tracy looked last week. I mean, again, it was Western Oregon. Who cares? But it looked like ISU kind of knew a little bit more about who they are. But hey, Kobe Tracy goes 6 of 18 for 72 yards. Gets pulled. Hunter Hayes is the dude who threw all the touchdowns, but this was a 38-7 game at halftime. So take from that what you will about Idaho State connecting on a few touchdowns in the second half. But I want to go to McLean before I go to you, Patty. McLean's take. Bengals were just completely unprepared, allowed turnovers, penalties, etc. Hunter Hayes, quarterback who has been backup, was the leading rusher for the team last year. Hunter Hayes threw all 4 of ISU's touchdown passes in the second half and restarted the quarterback competition. For a team like Idaho State, Patty, they know who they are and they need to outscore teams. They're trying to do it, spreading the ball through the air. Being a quarter of the way through the season and looking like they're on their 3rd starting quarterback, not because of injuries, that's not what, hey, if a team's going to beat you through the air, this isn't something you can say is acceptable if the team's trying to take steps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think part of the blowouts being that bad was I think North Dakota's a pretty dang good team, but I don't think they're that good. And I think Idaho State definitely has like the talent to make this a lot closer of a game than it was. When you look at the national perspective of this game, a lot of people thought, hey, North Dakota's to a letdown game. Idaho State could come in there and, give them all they can handle and maybe pull this thing off. And it was not even slightly close. So, I think there's definitely maybe some reevaluating on like the team identity from the coaching side after a beatdown like that. But also, looking into Big Sky play, I don't think they're going to change anything drastically. You got to think maybe Kobe Tracy stays and gets a lot of reps against Big Sky teams. But like, it's hard to tell with them, and they're gonna play 4 quarterbacks throughout the Big Sky season. I'm almost certain.
I mean, so last year they used 2 quarterbacks, and Cody Hawkins is obviously fine with that. But I don't know. If you're a Bengal, I think your takeaway needs to be, look, obviously Idaho State was not going to make the playoffs this year. So maybe you say, hey, out of conference is more about trying to figure out who the team is. But by game 2 of Big Sky play, if the Bengals are going to look promising like they did at the end of last year, the Bengals need to have this offensive identity thing down. Cody Hawkins his identity is offense. And if the team looks this lost offensively, that's, I don't know. I mean, Patty, think like, hey, this inverse, a Bobby Houck team looking like they don't know what they want to do defensively. Like you'd say, okay, that's a bit of a mess, man. That's the thing you're supposed to know. That's how I interpret this Idaho State is. But I mean, Idaho State's one of the lower teams. Their out of conference can feel a little more volatile because it's just ugly with losses. And North Dakota's going to be 3-1 at the end of next week. They're ranked. So, getting your ass kicked by a good team is not the worst thing in the world, but really that offensive identity for Idaho State, and I'm not what they do, but in like the cohesiveness of who they're going to rely on. I feel like the Bengals are a step behind where they want it to be. And in the comment section, McLean Westbrook saying sounds like Jordan Cook might redshirt. Yeah, Cook started week 1 and has not seen the field since being pulled during week 1. So that's what I mean about they're on their potentially third starting quarterback with injuries not being causal to any of the shifts. Number 7, Weber State. Weber State, I'm going to say on the main Tubs of Club show, I completely overlooked this matchup with Lamar. And Lamar, honestly, they just look good. Although if you're a Weber fan, you're telling yourself you should have absolutely won this game. Weber goes down 17-16 to Lamar. This was a game that was contested tightly the entire way through. At halftime, it's 10-10 when Weber had trailed 0-10 midway through the second quarter. No fourth quarter scoring from either team. So honestly, it was just tight all the way through. Richie Munoz for Weber, 22-30 for 184 yards and a touchdown. Damon Banks and on the ground, 23 rushes for 83 yards. I guess this feels like a little bit of a letdown on the Weber end, but Lamar's also better than we thought they were. And I also we've also known, hey, like what does Weber know about themselves? Do they know who they are? I don't think they still completely are down with what they're trying to do offensively, or they're just not that good offensively, but giving up. It's just hard to lose when you surrender 17, Patty. I'll throw it to you on that. Most defenses, if you can hold the other team to 17, if that's your average, the word we have for that is best in conference. So it's rough to do that and come away with a loss if you're Weber State and you have playoff aspirations. You had this game circled as, we got to come away with this one.
Yeah. And like from the Weber State, fandom, they are panicking a little bit here because they overlooked Lamar too. I think anyone that pays attention to the Big Sky was probably overlooking this Lamar matchup. But I think Lamar's a pretty good team, and I think they might be a playoff contender. But also, if you're wanting to be a playoff team in the Big Sky, you got to win this game. And they had opportunities to do it. It just felt like they were just a tick off. It felt like they were behind the chains a lot on offense. And it still feels like the offensive staff there doesn't quite fully trust Richie to throw the ball down the field other than like a fade route. I don't know if that's because of something they've seen in practice, or if it's just because Richie's a little bit of a gunslinger and likes to throw it around. It's hard to tell. And their line didn't quite look good enough to be able to just run the ball like it seems like they want to stay ahead of the chains. They were getting stuffed up the middle a lot. So, I think their solution is they gotta let Richie go, man, because they kind of give him a lot of RPO stuff where he gets to throw little quick screens and quick slants, but they don't let him stretch the field much other than 50-50 ball up the sideline. So I think that might be their solution offensively.
Yeah, well, I mean, let me say what you're saying in a different way. Weber State, no team has to be good at everything to pick up wins. Every team is a compilation of what you do well, what you don't do as well. Weber State is still strong defensively. They still have one of the better fronts in the conference. I hear you saying, hey, the way Weber could trust their defense is to let Munoz play a little bit, and provided he's not killing them with turnovers, which he didn't this game. I mean, both teams had a single turnover. So Munoz certainly was not throwing picks all over the place by any means in this game. But you're saying, hey, if you have a strong defense, if you're strong defensively the way Weber State is, well, maybe what they do is they say, hey, well, we're going to give Munoz a shot to do what he can and know there might be a couple mistakes, but we think our defense will make up for it.
I think there's a little bit of panic about the defense among Weber fans. And I believe they gave up 240 yards on the ground. They gave up a lot of yards on the ground to Lamar, who they did not see coming at all. And I mean, a big part of that is Lamar's offensive line looked pretty dang good. But I think they're really missing that duo of middle linebackers that they had last year with Kelly and Winston Reed. I think if they had got those guys, they'd be probably a top 2 Big Sky defense. Feels like they're just missing that presence.
Yeah, so they gave up 203 yards rushing on 42 carries. Long rush of 27, which is to say, to back up what you're talking about, is it was more steadily giving up.
Yeah.
4 and 5 yard chunk plays when, as you referenced, if Weber's getting behind the chains, they're not necessarily doing that. This I wouldn't say this was a defensive outing to panic over. I mean, the total
Yeah.
yardage was relative to saying Weber underperformed offensively. The total yardage was like a 50-yard gap between the two. This was a game Weber State could quite easily have won.
They absolutely gave it away. They had the ball 4th and 1 on the 1 yard line, 4th and goal on the 1 yard line, 2 minutes to go, down 1. And they went for it instead of just kicking the field goal to give themselves a lead. Then they don't get it, goal line stuffed. They get the ball back, get into field goal range, kicker misses a field goal. Like, just field coaching, this is like, I don't know. I think that's where Weber fans are getting disappointed and panicking a little bit.
Yeah, you're talking about you're talking about not kicking a field goal in a game where no one scored in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
As in, again, like different version of trust your defense. Like, hey, yeah, I know 2 points isn't 3 points, but how many points do you need to win by? 1.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on from Weber State, man, I'm trying to keep these shows on the shorter end, but we probably need to talk about Northern Arizona for a minute. Northern Arizona, the Lumberjacks. I think there's a chance they're okay, Patty. Which is not a place I necessarily like to be, but I mean, Northern Arizona essentially did the exact same thing to Utah Tech that Montana State did just a week ago. Northern Arizona travels to wherever in God's name Utah Tech is, and beats the former Dixie State Trailblazers 45-17, game that was 31-3 at halftime. What I think we're seeing out of Northern Arizona is they're trying to pound teams on the ground. 44 rushes for 333 yards and 3 touchdowns. But I'll give you a minute to talk about NAU. I mean, look, it is a new dawn in Flagstaff, but what do you think? What does Northern Arizona appear to know about themselves?
I think they're building it to be not Montana State. Like, they're not trying to become Montana State, but they're kind of like following that mold a little bit in terms of like they're trying to play good defense and they're trying to run the ball really well. The rest will sort itself out. Like, they only threw the ball 19 times in this game, and I mean 5 of those were a backup quarterback. They just ran the heck out of the ball. It worked. They played good defense and they looked really good. But also, I mean, it's Utah Tech. I think Utah Tech is like really bad. So, it's definitely a encouraging performance by NAU. I don't know if we necessarily know a ton about them yet. We know like what they want to do identity-wise, but do we know if they're more on the Montana State end of like we're going to run the football and we're going to be really good defensively, or are they on the Portland State side of that?
Yeah,
that's VC.
First-year head coach Brian Wright, who, I mean, he was a winner at D2, went 23-3 the last couple of years at Pittsburgh State. But hey, full disclosure, I don't watch a lot of D2 football, so I can't tell you what like exactly how things were at Pittsburgh State, other than Brian Wright got this job from earning it at Pittsburgh State. And look, Northern Arizona, the last few years, they were never catastrophes, but they were underwhelming. But they were also one of those teams who it seemed like the last couple of years, if they could figure a thing or two out, they're gonna be fine. Quarterback was a bit of a mess for Northern Arizona last year, and a solution to that is make the quarterback position a little less important, and that's what Northern Arizona is doing. Darvin Hubbard, 14 rushes for 130 yards, paces the Lumberjacks. But the thing I want to also key in on, holding Utah Tech to 286 yards on the game. I mean, yeah, Utah Tech may suck, but Northern Arizona, they put up numbers not that different from what Montana State did last week. So I guess that's the thing to pay attention to, with the secondary thing being, we've just seen this evolution in some of the power FCS conference football. The teams that are better are right now passing is kind of complementary. They are strong defensively and they try to gash you on the ground. And Northern Arizona is absolutely using that template. Before we get into our top 5, not Portland State top 5, we already got there. Got to tell you guys about HughesRiverExpedition.com, which, hey, if you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal-owned and operated since 1976 and are ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway, and check out special trips like the one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. You just bring it close, let HRE handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call Cullen right now at 406-540-4450 or check them out at HughesRiver.com. Now our actual top 5. I think we can talk about Davis, number 5, UC Davis, a little bit less because I don't think my opinion of Davis or anyone's opinion of Davis probably changed much after a 24-21 win at Southern Utah in a game that UC Davis absolutely could have lost. Now, if you're long in the tooth in the Big Sky world, just don't completely write off Southern Utah. I mean, they beat FBS UTEP in week 2. Not saying UTEP would win an FCS power conference, but an FCS team picking up an FBS win that's not UConn is usually, or UMass is something we pay attention to. But I look at this was UC Davis. UC Davis is down 14-6 at halftime, put up 18 in the third, do not score in the fourth. This is kind of in line for me with how Davis has been, which is solid across the board, spectacular at essentially nothing. There's not an area they're going to get their ass kicked, but there also isn't necessarily an area that against good teams, they're for sure going to light the world on fire. Other than to say, I mean, Land Larison was just all over the place. 15 carries, 88 yards, and 7 receptions for 92 yards and a touchdown. But again, hey, that's nothing new. Land Larison he was preseason offensive player of the year for a reason. He's the single name you are most paying attention to if you see Davis on your schedule. So, Patty, real quick, does this change anything about who you think Davis is, or are they still who you thought they were?
No, I mean, I think this was a pretty similar performance for them than it was versus Commerce last week. As in, well, first of all, Southern Utah I think is a lot better team than Texas A&M Commerce, but they looked. Offensively, they looked pretty dang good between the 20s, and then they got into the red zone, and they just struggled because I don't think they have the offensive line to push people around down there. And they try to give it to Larison, but they need space for their offense to really operate well, since I just don't know if their offensive line is quite there. And so, this game, they drove right down the field, and then Southern Utah bows up in the red zone, 3 points. That was how this whole game kind of felt like that for them. It felt like this game was more of a, I'd say almost like a 35-21 type of game in terms of how the teams were driving. But, I think the limiting factor there is just they're going to be their offensive line. 2, I think they're really missing the Connors brothers on defense, as in, all conference safety. Rex Connors and his brother, the other Connors, is a linebacker for them. Both of them have been out with injury the last 2 weeks, and ever since they left, they've been giving up a lot of yards on the ground, which are typically chunk plays where Connors, that safety, would come up and cut it off at 8 rather than 20. So they gave up some chunks in the run game, but overall, I think they're absolutely a top 5 team in the Big Sky. I still think with the Connors back, they can be a lot better team, but at least defensively, offensively, we'll kind of see.
Yeah, you're just saying to me that this. So when if you're a Vandal, when you saw Davis 2 years ago, just the fact of their O-line was a little bit jarring, relative to what Vandals saw on their O-line a couple of years ago. You're saying that has definitely taken at least a half step back. And sorry, you take a half step back. That can explain that. It helps explain why a team that isn't particularly weak in any single area, is also not looking particularly strong in any single area. And honestly, like the same reference here that I used talking about Idaho State. Tim Plow is a longtime offensive coordinator, well respected in the Big Sky. If there's an area that you thought Davis would not look like they'd taken a step back on, it's on the offensive side of the ball. And what you're telling me is, look, hey, with the Connors brothers back, they're definitely top 5. We have them top 5. But top 5 can mean, hey, 4 or 5, definitely not 3. As far as differentiating, not for poll jockeying. We're talking about like profiling teams for, like, let's say playoff purposes. Number 4, Patty. I'm sorry. I'm sorry we got to go this direction, but I think Andy Thompson's listening to the show. I think Andy Thompson's like, you know what, that Patty, I heard he's doing some high school coaching work. I'm taking his tip. Sacramento State picks up a win this week. Now, don't freak out too much about winning 34-7 at home against Nichols. What was different for Sacramento State is offensively, the story for them had been, it doesn't look like they really know what they're doing quarterback wise. And the way they split it with Caden Bennett doing what he does, being able to run on the ground, that does help open up holes for guys like Elijah Tautoliver. But Caden Bennett, he's kind of regressed as a passer over the last, end of 2023, start of 2024. So if Carson Conklin's under center, you understand how the team might be able to be a little more diverse offensively, but diverse offensively doesn't have to mean better. Look at Montana State. Well, Carson Conklin got the start, went 22-32 for 2 touchdowns and a pick. Elijah Tautoliver, 21 rushes for 111 total yards and a touchdown. The team as a whole rushes 34 times for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns. And, Sacramento State picked up a win like they absolutely needed to. And it was a relatively convincing win again, but asterisk, Nicholls State is 0-3. Nicholls State has not, they hung on tight against
last year.
They hung on tight against, they hung on tight against Louisiana Tech. So maybe I jumped to writing them off too quick. So don't write this off, but don't say that's a playoff team. Patty, are you devastated to see Sacramento State may have decided who they were this week?
I mean, yes, but they look pretty good, man. I think this might have been one of those changes that boosts them from, middle to upper Big Sky to like, hey, they might be really good. Because if they're able to run the ball, this Nichols team, like, you're kind of writing them off, but last year they were averaging like 200. I think they're averaging over 200 yards a game rushing. They rushed the ball for 10 yards in this game. That's including sacks. But, I mean, that is pretty impressive against this Nichols team. Colin Guggenheim was really good running back last year. This is a pretty convincing, impressive win, in my opinion. I think Nichols, I don't think they're a good team nationally, but, like, they're no Drake. So, it makes me a little scared if I'm a Big Sky fan, thinking, dang, Sac State might have potentially gotten over the Caden Bennett, Carson Conklin issues hump.
Well, and you hit on the defensive thing, and this probably matters more. 14 TFLs, 7 sacks. That's dominating. If they're gonna show up defensively like that, and then if you're doing that, you just have to be good enough offensively, and they were more than good enough against Nichols State. So I guess the thing for me, I know we led with the quarterback thing. What I'm looking at is, holy shit, 14 TFLs? That's penetration. So yeah,
that's pretty impressive. And one asterisk, Nichols definitely isn't a passing team, and I think the weakness of the Sac State defense might be the passing defense side of things. But still, man, like 14 TFLs is impressive against a solid Division I team.
Yeah, so for Sac State heading into this game, now they're 1-2. Their 2 losses, they were relatively competitive against 2 Mountain West teams, San Jose State, Fresno State. They honestly should have beat San Jose State. If they pick up that win and they have today, you're suddenly talking about this team, honestly, like probably not different than we're talking about like Idaho. Not 100%, but like not that far off. So yeah, pay attention to Sacramento State. I mean, some teams do take a few games to figure out who they are and to get linchpin things situated. Sacramento State, I think they might have figured some stuff out, Patty. So our top three, of which we're only really going to talk about two, because Montana State was on bye. But Ron Lowney, we'll touch on that for a second. If you're here, we'll get some attention. Before top three, patreon.com/Tubs of the Club, guys. We record 3 episodes a week during football season, a pregame for Idaho, a postgame for Idaho, and this one you're watching right now covering the entire conference. Costs as little as a cup of coffee to help us keep the lights on, or my whiskey cabinet full. And if you're into Idaho football, honestly, if you're into Big Sky, as long as you're not a tool, our Discord is going to be fun as hell. It explodes during game days. Got a bunch of different threads. Discord's a huge thing. So patreon.com/Tubs at the club. Number three, not number two. Number three, Montana. Montana bounced back. Now, this was that game most certainly Montana State should have bounced back with. Montana beats Morehead State 59-2. Nice baseball score on that too. And like Patty, I filibustered you on a couple of these. So one, did this game change to you what Montana seems to know about themselves? And are you reading much into 59-2 win over Morehead State?
No, but it looks like they actually ran the ball, which is like the big thing that a lot of Grizz people that pay attention to the Grizz were like, hey, we have one of the best running back rooms in the country. Let's run the dang ball. And they rushed for 400 yards. I think that is a little concerning if you're a Big Sky fan. Like, hey, maybe they figured out, let's hand the dang ball off to these guys when, our offensive line didn't look that great in pass protection. And, I think that's something to note, just play call wise. But other than that, not really.
Yeah, 55 rushes for 410 yards and 7 touchdowns. I'm not taking too much away from this because, look, we know Montana's not bad. Okay, spoiler alert: the Grizz having a disappointing season this year is still a football team that's going to win the majority of their games and very likely make the playoffs. So Ron Lowney saying cupcake, I'm not going to argue with that whatsoever. But just from what we can take away with this, Patty, Bobby Houck has always been a dude who wants to run the ball more anyway. So I'm not going to jump too far ahead because the better teams on the conference are going to make Montana prove it enough through the air. But if you're wondering like, hey, why is Montana not using their running backs the way we thought they would? Well, they did this game. Malay Fantani, who I guarantee butchered that name, 24 rushes for 117 yards and a touchdown. Last season's Jerry Rice Award winner Eli Gilman, 8 rushes for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. Nick Ostmo, 10 rushes, 76 yards and a touchdown. That's the kind of production you'd expect they want. But hey, Ron Lowney saying they still don't have a QB. Both Kiali Ayat and Logan Fife, both split reps. Kiali Ayat goes 9 of 11 for 79 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Logan Fife, 9 of 16, 87 yards, no TDs, no turnovers. Downside for Montana, I think they need someone to win that quarterback position, but I also think, like you said, and like we've talked about, some of the better teams, the Big Sky and Mountain Missouri Valley, they're playing power football. The question is, does Montana have a good enough O-line to play power football against the better teams? We'll say with North Dakota just absolutely murdering Idaho State, it does make Montana losing to North Dakota State in a game they should have won look more like, okay, come on, dudes, figure it out. It's not like a huge disappointment because North Dakota just looks good. Anything else you want to add?
Not really. I think they're going to be pretty good, but I don't know if they are quite, the number 2 team in the country that they were last year. That's where I'm at with them.
Yeah. Grizz did get, 5 sacks. That's more in line with what you expect out of a Montana team, but again, it's Morehead State. So anyway, I think we've hit this point. Montana had a good week. If you're a Grizz, you should be happy about this. But like, if your paradigm is how much does Montana know who they are? Looks like they're figuring stuff out on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, not 100% clear if this game is indicative of a step forward or just this is what the talent gap between these two teams should be. So, hey, Montana, check the box. That doesn't mean anything against Montana State. Number 2, Ron Lowney. You may have been right. Idaho's number 2. Now, I will say, for not that we don't care about poll jockeying, these are just averages. Idaho and Montana State were pretty damn near a tie. So just as that reference point, if Idaho's 2, obviously Montana State's number 1. And Ron Lowney saying October 12th, he's talking about, I'm assuming that that's the Montana State-Idaho game. I've got too much going on to have every goddamn game memorized off the top of my head right now. Idaho absolutely murders Albany, 41-13, a game that could very easily have been 62-9, 72-10, whatever. Just based off how early Idaho pulled their starters, based off a couple plays for Idaho that could have resulted in extra points. But that's we're not here for the what ifs. Idaho put on a completely dominating defensive performance. Albany had been a team that could run the ball a bit earlier in this year. Woodell Griffin is the guy who hurt Idaho in the playoff game in 2023. And Albany rushes 33 times for a total of 60 yards. Longest rush on the day for Albany was 9. Just complete decimation of Albany on the defensive side of the ball. And on the Idaho end, there had been the anxiety of what in God's name is going to go on at the quarterback position. Backup Jack Wagner, who is the starter until Jack Lane, who broke his collarbone in week 1, is healthy. Jack Wagner played a relatively similar stat line to the week prior as far as like completion percentage, right around he looks like he's just going to complete about 50% of his passes. That's who he is right now. Goes 10-20 for 156 yards and 2 touchdowns. Again, no turnovers. Huge if your quarterback's playing. On the ground, Idaho 33 rushes for 251 yards, including a 71 yards gained by Elisha Cummings and 2 touchdowns. Kind of the story of the game for me on the offensive side was Jordan Dwyer looking a lot more impressive than his 5 receptions, 68 yards total that. But hey, the 2 touchdowns matter. And guess, man, Idaho is looking great defensively and they're deep. So this is the 3rd game in a row. They look stronger defensively in the second half than they did in the first. So Patty, Idaho knows who they are.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I want to put a small dampener on this game. A lot of people, it was a ranked matchup, so people are really skyrocketing Idaho in the polls. I think Albany kind of sucks. But also, the Idaho defense, man, they just look really, really good. And it's hard to see anyone moving the ball very well on them. Like, their defensive style. Yeah. Like they give up some yards in the pass game, but it's almost kind of by design. Like they want to make these FCS quarterbacks be consistent, nickel and dime it down the field all the way. And they're trying to make you make a mistake. Like that's the whole scheme. And they just completely shut down the run, man.
Openings in the pass game are always intermediate, around the middle of the field. But like you said, like you got to complete those a lot against Idaho if you're going to drive.
I'm very, very impressed with the Idaho defense. So, man, Keyshawn James Newby, dude, he keeps adding to that Buck Buchanan race, resume because I think he's the front runner right now. And there's a few people that are close, but if he stays at this rate, it's it might be his to lose.
Yeah, Newby picked up his 6th sack. 3 games in, 6 sacks. By the way, he was a all league player last year, 5.5 sacks on the year. Already beat that. Like Super George 11 saying, won this game with a backup freshman quarterback. Yeah, and hey, just if you're Big Sky fans, if you're not deep into Idaho football, Jack Wagner only started 1 year as a high schooler. Played behind a guy playing at UW right now. So there's reason to understand Wagner's a guy who could develop a little bit heading into, as the season progresses. Now he is most certainly a backup quarterback. There's some accuracy issues. However, he tends to miss long, which means you're less likely to have picks and you're just more likely to have some kind of ugly incompletions. And look, all he has to do is be good enough because Idaho wants to run the ball. O-line looked good. Now again, Patty, you brought up the asterisk. Albany might suck, but the big question offensively for Idaho heading into the season before the Jack Lane injury was just what's the offensive line going to look like? This was a really strong performance from the Idaho offensive line. Now, if you want to tell me Albany sucks, well, I was at the game. I'm not going to argue that part, but the O-line looked good. You need a backup quarterback to not feel like he's pressured to make the right read with no time. And Jack Wagner had a lot of time on Saturday.
For sure. And I mean, one thing to note, just like Super George just said, I was about to bring this up. Idaho lost 2 starting offensive linemen for the year before this game. And with 2, it really kind of turned it into 3 backups in the game. They look pretty good, man. I'm pretty, that's a spot where the Idaho team a year ago or 2 years ago, that is a gaping hole. Once you go from the 6th offensive lineman to the 7th offensive lineman, the depth is they're playing right now. So I was very impressed by the offensive line, regardless of the opponent. But definitely something to keep an eye on is just the overall health of Idaho, especially offensively.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is, or what I'm going to say, I'm hearing from you is Idaho did this with 2 O linemen down. Big deal. Asterisk. There's only so many O linemen a team can lose for the year before it starts to become a pretty damn big deal. Every team's going to deal with injuries and injuries on the O-line between now and the end of the year. So Idaho is not unique in that they're going to have to deal with that. But losing too early after 2 weeks, I know we're 3 out, but the injuries came after 2 weeks, could matter. But the guys who are playing are checking off the boxes that as an Idaho fan, you're talking Jason Ecke or 3 team. The team shows they know how they're going to win games. They're going to kick ass defensively, and on the offensive side of the ball, they're going to try to run first. Question is, can Jack Wagner do enough? He's done enough in his 2 starts. So things are largely going pretty damn well in Idaho. Last team we're going to talk about, we have to go fast though, because I told Patty before the show, hey, let's just go like 35, 40 minutes. Yeah, good luck. Montana State on bye this week. They have Mercyhurst next week to close out their out-of-conference schedule. But remember, Montana State played week 0. So, of course, that means you have a bye week in OOC, because if you didn't play week 0, that is essentially a bye. Montana State still sitting at 3-0 with wins over New Mexico, 35-31, a game the Bobcats should have won by 20. 31-7 decimating at Utah Tech, and a 41-24 win over Maine at Montana State at Bozeman. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say, man. They're Bobcats look pretty damn good. They're exactly who they're. They know who they are. They want to run the ball. Here's what else they know who they are. They're keeping Tommy Mellott off the ground. He's rushed it 15 times in 3 games, and I believe it's three rushing touchdowns or in those 3 games. So he's only hit the ground from rushes 12 times. That counts sacks too. So yeah, Montana State's good. I don't know what what potential demerit you'd have against Montana State is at 3 games. It's more to me. Look, let me say this different, because again, we don't care about pole jockeying. Idaho and Montana State clearly look like the for sure 2 best teams in the conference. Idaho and Montana State are clearly teams this far you'd pencil in as they will be competing for a bye in the playoffs as we get deeper into the season. And Montana State and Idaho both know who they are. Montana State a little bit more with fewer injury issues. But yeah, if you're a fan of these 2 teams, you're sitting pretty damn pretty after 3 weeks. Get 25% of the way through football. Can't believe that's where we're at. Yeah. After OOC is done, that's, good Lord, a third of the way through the season, man. Anything else on Montana State, Patty?
Jim, I mean, the offensive line looks good. The defense looks better than they did against New Mexico. I think I think they're a South Dakota State clear number one, like best team in the conference by a mile? No. But right now, I think they look like the best team. And, they are Montana State, and they're the same Montana State team they've been the last 2 years, 3 years, minus the quarterback kind of controversy, I guess you could say, which I think has made them better.
And hey, just so we can talk Montana State for an extra minute, the Bobcats, Ron Lowney was talking about Idaho on October 12th. Idaho travels to Bozeman for what will be, honestly, on paper right now, the game of the year, other than rivalry games, game of the year, other than rivalry games in the conference. It's virtually impossible for me to see Montana State as being anything but 6-0 heading into that game. So, hey, playoff implications for both teams. And I mean, like the first half of Montana State's schedule, to be fair, minus New Mexico's FBS, is pretty soft. They close the year with Sacramento State at UC Davis in Montana. So if you're a Bobcat, you probably want some margin for error built in addition to revenge. But, whatever, man. If you view Idaho or Montana State number one, number two, I don't care what you do. It's just these two are obviously the top two teams. Comment section, we sucked at getting to you guys tonight, but thanks for showing up. Ron Lowney, as always. Like I just said, Ron Lowney saying 3 easy games until the Idaho game. Super George 111, turnover Tommy better not get hurt. Jesus Christ. Love how because Idaho's got Tommy McCormick and Montana State has Tommy Malott. We have the alliterative descriptors attached to both of them. One last thing about Idaho. Tommy McCormick had a pick 6. That's another thing Idaho defensively. If they can start forcing turnovers, that's just another gear because Idaho has not yet forced a ton of turnovers on the season. They've had a few just drop through their fingertips. If Idaho starts converting those, that's another gear. Oh, Jesus Christ, we're in an hour. Patty, last words before we call it a night.
Yeah, it should be a fun week this week in the Big Sky. You got a number of kind of I don't know about top 25, but like actually decent teams playing decent FCS teams. And we might actually like learn some things about, NAU plays Incarnate Word, Idaho plays Abilene Christian, all teams that look pretty good, Montana, Western Carolina. So it should be an interesting week in the Big Sky. So I don't know, get around, watch some games.
So is Western Carolina playoff team last year, right? Western Carolina?
I don't know if they were. They started really good, then they lost one of their really good players to injury, lost a couple games they shouldn't have. So I don't know if they did, but they came into the year top 10 aspirations, and then they lost to Campbell. So, I think they kind of go as their quarterback goes. If Cole Gonzalez has like a really good game, they could absolutely beat Montana. If Cole Gonzalez doesn't play very good, Montana's going to smoke them. That's how it's going to go, I think.
Yes. So my eye this week is not on UC Davis giving Utah Tech their third Big Sky loss. It is a little bit on curious about Southern Utah, Idaho State.
Yes.
So as far as like deciding how much attention should we give Idaho State's getting their ass kicked against North Dakota versus North Dakota just being good and Idaho State just having a rough game. Other than that, Idaho at Abilene Christian I got my eye on that because it's Idaho, but also like expectations after what we saw this week in Idaho seem to have ratcheted back up due to expectations that shifted due to the quarterback injury. That position seems stabilized, so the concern is a little bit less.
NAU Incarnate Word could be
that could be interesting.
As in, like, if NAU shows out, man, maybe they might be pretty good. I mean, Incarnate Word, like, they haven't beat anyone yet, but like they look competitive against Southern Illinois. Probably should have beat Southern Illinois. Look competitive against South Dakota State. So like they're nationally a good team.
What do you mean they didn't beat anyone? They beat the number 10 team in our power rankings, Northern Colorado, in week 1.
There you go. I mean, Northern Colorado made them look pedestrian. So it'll be interesting. I think Northern Arizona has a shot in that game if they play well, but it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you. Paying attention to that game as well. Ron, love you. Not paying attention to Montana State and Mercyhurst. You guys are going to win 45-3. So, and I guess looking at Eastern Nevada, if Eastern, I'm not going to spend my weekend watching the game, Patty. I'm with you on what you talked about, but that's the kind of game where if Eastern's going to turn it around, they probably, if they're going to sniff playoffs this year, they probably have to beat Nevada. And it's not like Nevada's not that great.
You know, if Eastern wants to make the playoffs, they have to probably go undefeated. My hope for Eastern this year is I feel like if they play like they had the last 2 weeks, they're going to go 2-12 or 1-12. I think they're probably, or 1-11. What math? I think they're going to go 2-10 and beat like Nevada, Montana, or Montana State and just completely like have a no sense at all win and then just look like shit the rest of the year. That's what I'm hoping for, and I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, Kevin Marshall in the comments section, host of FCS Nation Radio. UIW didn't beat anyone last year either. Kevin he's a connoisseur of all things Southern, you might say. And I'm talking FCS football as well. So like, hey, I'm going to co-sign if that's Kevin's take on UIW. I'm going to co-sign that. So guys, thanks for joining. We're going to be here next week. Someday we're going to get this show at a time. Here's the problem. You and I both actually give a shit about the other teams in the conference. And we
talked about Northern Colorado for like 10 minutes.
I know, man. But Christ. Okay. Hey, we're just done. We're going to call it a night. Patty, you're not going to say go Vandals, but I'm going to say it for you. I am going to do what I do every single week, which is Grandpa Brian has no idea how to close the show. So I'm going to find a video. I'm going to play it, and we will see you next week at about this time, ending obviously at this time. Go Vandals.
Go Eags.
You don't mean that.
I got a lot of great friends in Pocatello, but there were just some ignorant people that were sitting behind our bench abusing the kids and me. All I did was win there and leave there. And they're still bitter apparently 8 years later, which is their problem, certainly not mine. I've moved